Entity 303 is an interesting case study in how internet horror mythology evolves, fractures, and sustains itself through collective storytelling rather than a single fixed canon. Unlike more clearly defined creepypasta figures, Entity 303 exists in a deliberately unstable state. Its identity, motives, and even its nature change depending on who is telling the story, and that instability is precisely what gives it strength. Rather than weakening the myth, contradiction reinforces the sense that Entity 303 is something that cannot be fully understood or contained. This reflects the early internet environment where anonymity, rumor, and remix culture allowed fictional entities to feel strangely alive. At its core, Entity 303 is usually portrayed as a hostile digital intelligence or a corrupted presence embedded within Minecraft, a game that naturally lends itself to unsettling interpretations. Minecraft's procedural generation, immense empty landscapes, and lack of explicit narrative encourage players to project meaning onto coincidence. Entity 303 emerges from that space of uncertainty, where Herobrine is often depicted as a silent watcher or an omen of something wrong beneath the surface. Entity 303 is far more aggressive. It destroys worlds, deletes progress, corrupts files, and communicates directly with the player in unsettling ways. This shifts the fear from passive observation to active sabotage. The name 303 itself contributes heavily to the unease. It resembles an error code but does not correspond clearly to any known system message, which encourages speculation. Some interpret it as a symbol of incomplete deletion, a failed process, or a corrupted identifier that was never meant to be seen. The lack of a clear explanation is essential. Horror loses power when everything is explained, and Entity 303 resists explanation by design. Even stories that attempt to give it an origin often contradict one another, reinforcing the idea that its true nature cannot be pinned down. Entity 303 also reflects anxieties that are uniquely digital. Traditional horror often centers on threats to the body or physical space, but Entity 303 threatens data, progress, and personal creation. In a game like Minecraft, where players invest hours or years into building worlds, losing that work feels deeply personal. Entity 303 weaponizes that attachment. The fear is not simply that something is watching you, but that something can erase what you made without warning, without reason, and without leaving evidence. The narrative style surrounding Entity 303 further enhances its believability. Many stories are framed as warning posts, chat logs, or technical reports, mimicking the tone of real troubleshooting discussions. This blurs the line between fiction and reality, especially for players who have experienced crashes, corrupted saves, or unexplained bugs. By grounding the horror in plausible events, the stories encourage doubt. Even if the reader knows logically that Entity 303 is fictional, the possibility lingers, and that lingering doubt is where the fear takes hold. Over time, Entity 303 has become a symbol of creepypasta culture itself. It is copied, rewritten, exaggerated, and sometimes intentionally distorted, yet it never disappears. Each retelling mutates the entity slightly, which aligns perfectly with its supposed role as a corrupting force. In this way, Entity 303 functions less as a character and more as a narrative virus, spreading through repetition and thriving on inconsistency. When compared to Herobrine, Entity 303 feels like a darker evolution of the same idea. Herobrine represents the unsettling sense that something is wrong with the world, while Entity 303 represents the fear that the world itself can turn against you. Together, they illustrate how Minecraft creepypasta taps into feelings of isolation, vulnerability, and loss of control. Entity 303 ultimately endures not because it is visually frightening, but because it embodies the fear that our digital spaces, which feel personal and safe, are fragile and vulnerable to forces we cannot see or fully understand. The idea of Entity 303 as a group of hackers rather than a single supernatural being reframes the myth in a way that makes it feel both more grounded and, in some ways, more unsettling. When Entity 303 is interpreted as an organized collective, the narrative shifts from paranormal horror to a hybrid of digital folklore, cyber paranoia, and internet-era mythmaking. Instead of a lone, omnipotent figure haunting Minecraft worlds, Entity 303 becomes a symbol of anonymous coordination, hidden intent, and the fear that unseen people can manipulate digital spaces without ever revealing themselves. Seen this way, Entity 303 represents the anxiety surrounding multiplayer environments and online creativity. Minecraft worlds are often deeply personal spaces, especially in single-player mode, where players assume total control. The myth of Entity 303 hacking into worlds, altering terrain, spawning impossible structures, or corrupting files taps into the fear that even private digital spaces are not truly secure. If Entity 303 is a hacker group, the impossible actions attributed to it become technically plausible. World edits, server intrusions, corrupted chunks, or scripted events designed to look supernatural. The horror doesn't come from magic, but from expertise wielded invisibly. The collective aspect also explains the consistency and scale of sightings. A single entity appearing across countless worlds, versions, and player experiences stretches credibility, even within fictional logic. A group, however, makes repetition believable. Different members could reproduce similar signatures, symbols, structures, or behaviors, creating the illusion of a singular omnipresent force. Over time, these repeated patterns solidify into lore, and the name Entity 303 becomes a shared mask worn by many individuals rather than a single face. This mirrors real-world hacker collectives, where identity is deliberately blurred to create mystique and intimidation. There is also a psychological dimension to interpreting Entity 303 as a group of hackers. The myth thrives on uncertainty. Players are never sure whether what they witnessed was a glitch, a prank, a mod conflict, or something intentional. A hacker group exploits that uncertainty perfectly. By operating at the edge of plausibility, Entity 303 doesn't need to do anything overtly dramatic. Subtle anomalies are enough. Strange signs, altered worlds, unexplained logs. These details invite players to fill in the gaps themselves, which often results in fear amplifying far beyond the original act. Entity 303 as a collective can also be read as a commentary on power dynamics in online spaces. Hackers occupy a liminal role, not official developers, not ordinary players, but something in between. They understand the system deeply enough to bend or break it, yet remain outside formal authority. This fits Entity 303's portrayal as something that exists within the game, but is not bound by its rules. The name itself, stylized as 303 rather than 303, reinforces that sense of deliberate distortion, as if even language is being subtly corrupted to signal presence. Ultimately, viewing Entity 303 as a group of hackers transforms the legend from a simple creepypasta villain into a metaphor for collective anonymity and digital intrusion. It suggests that the true horror isn't a ghost in the code, but people hiding behind usernames, scripts, and shared symbols, capable of reshaping virtual worlds while never being seen. In that interpretation, Entity 303 isn't just a character, it's an idea, sustained by coordination, secrecy, and the internet's endless capacity to turn rumor into reality.